Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Haitian Language and Culture Institute. My name is Dr. Edwidge Crevecoeur-Bryant, and I teach at Flagler College. I'm an associate professor and the ESOL coordinator. The title of my presentation or my workshop today is Literacy Instruction of Haitian Students. Biliteracy is an asset. Again, welcome. Our agenda for today consists of the following. We're going to be talking about, I'm going to be discussing history and language, family practices and literacy, research on literacy, metacognitive knowledge of reading, Haitian students and their use of proverbs, linguistic subsystems, and videos of Haitian students engaged in reading will be shown throughout the presentation. The pictures that you see here, this is Mr. Samuel Bonzou, and he is the co-director of the school of our program in Haiti. And I want to say school, but there are many different aspects of it. Really, he does so much for the community, and together we are trying our very best to lift Piton, and so far everything seems to be working very well. It's not perfect yet. Our schools still lack a lot of resources. However, we're still working very hard and the students, especially the students and the teachers, everyone is so committed to the education of all of the students and the improvement of the community. And a lot has changed, a lot is happening, moving slowly, but it is absolutely working. The other picture that you see here are some of our amazing and adorable children who are also at the school. I just wanted to introduce you to them. All right, so we're going to first briefly talk about history and language. For history and language, as many of you know, because I have presented, or maybe a few of you are aware that I've presented on a number of occasions on history, especially the history of Haiti, because it's such a rich and powerful history that I do believe that when it's shared with Haitian students, it gives them really a sense of pride, especially because so often we hear negative words associated with Haiti. And so when we're able to give students the positive aspects of Haiti and Haitians and Haitian Creole, we have to take the time to do just that. So I always encourage educators to find out more about the history of Haiti. And in the last video, I mentioned about taking a trip to Savannah. If there's a weekend that you wanted to just take a very short trip, one could be to Savannah, and for you to see the monument there that dedicated to the Haitian soldiers who fought alongside of the Americans and the French in order to defeat the British during the American Revolution. So there were over 500 Haitians who left. Then it was Saint-Domingue to go fight alongside, as I mentioned, alongside the Americans and the French. And among what was shown there as at the monument itself, there is the young Henri Christophe, and he's playing the drums on that, he, as you know, Henri Christophe returns back to, after the war, he goes back to Haiti and then becomes one of the leaders of Haiti, and he also becomes King Henri. And so all of that rich history at the time that Haiti was divided between North and the Otibonite and the South and West. So it was split actually in terms of government, in terms of governance. And so you had King Henri in the North, and then you had Pétion in the South. So just again, a lot of history that can serve as a way for you to engage the students in a lot of discussions in the classroom. The other thing I wanted to mention to you very quickly is the use of etymology in a language classroom. When I taught third grade, I found this to be incredibly powerful and useful, the use of etymology. So basically with etymology is connecting really the historical linguistics. So you're tying history with language so that students are not even aware that they're learning about history or they're learning about language. So it was an erasing of those boundaries that we often place in our classrooms. Okay, children today, we're going to take out, now it's time for history, now it's time for science, now it's time. So they don't see the interconnectedness of a lot of the subjects. So what I tried to do, and what I did with etymology, is that we link language and history. So I would give the students vocabulary words, but we had a big chart in the classroom where I would give them a vocabulary word, and they knew what they had to do was look up the history of the word. So they would look it up and they would find, oh, that this word came from Haiti in originated, let's say in Haiti in 1920, for example. And so they would come in all excited. Oh, Miss Kafka, I found where the year came from, what this word came from, and so forth. And they would write it on this huge chart, as I said, that I had, that they could always just contribute to it. And then another student the following day would come back and say, oh no, this word existed in 1876, for example, and this another part of the world. That's what this student was able to find, and they would talk about it. Really, why? And they're just then a lot of language and a lot of excitement just around the word, and they would put it on the chart, and then they'll take the next word. So the words came alive. You know, they were seen as something that can be used and manipulated and talked about and discussed, and new ideas came as a result. So it doesn't necessarily have to be history and language, but you must find ways to bring language alive in your classroom so that the students feel as though this is something that's worth knowing about and it's worth developing as well. The next point is family practices, and this I touched on my previous presentation as well, so that family practice are not static, as you can see with the quote here from Espinosa and Asensi Moreno, when they said that family practices, literacy practices are not static, but instead evolve based on need, purpose, and access to resources. And it's really interesting because right now, many are looking at family literacy practicing around the use of smartphones or computers. How are those being used in the homes of our emergent bilinguals? Because they're resources. So they have, depending on your access to resources, determined on how you use those particular devices. So they recommend that we must start with an understanding that children come to school with language practices that were developed within their families and communities, and their backgrounds may be different from what we typically value in school. And I talked about that quite extensively, again, especially as it relates to translanguaging. So being able to really and truly look at what is it that the students, what are their family practices, their literacy practices, and again, that they could be very different, where you can have some homes where you'll have computers and smartphones and lots of books, where there notes left on refrigerator doors. I don't know to what extent they still do that, but I know that we still do it. Just little notes on the doors, as opposed to simply texting all the time to your child. So what are those literacy practices that are being used in the home? Are Haitian homes, are they still telling stories or not, and so forth? But we know that they vary. They vary. So whose family practices are we celebrating in our classrooms? That only certain family practices, because we have an idea of what they are they the only ones celebrated in the classrooms? because you continue to build on them, while there are other family practices that are never talked about at all. Okay? So this is a way to bring all this information to a sharing in your classroom. So what is the research? What exactly do we mean by literacy and also readers? So this is a brief account on research on teaching language and literacy to readers. So there are three interrelated set of factors pertaining to language literacy and world knowledge. And then we will see some examples of how this is used in Haitian classrooms, especially in Haiti. So there are three related factors. Whenever we're talking about literacy, there are three factors. So the first is the linguistic factors that we have to take into consideration, knowing textual elements, such as words, sentence, and text structures. And I talk quite extensively about text structures because I do believe, although I'm not going to talk I'm not going to speak on text structures today in terms of a full presentation, but I do believe that when students are aware of text structures and how they work in text, they are able to understand what the authors actually mean or want for them to focus on. So a super very quick example is one text structure, as many of you know, but may be, for example, sequencing, or another text structure, problem and solution. Students who are considered to be proficient readers, they already know about these text structures simply because of the fact that they've been, especially in English, the text structures in English, they are familiar with them because they've had parents reading to them, or they've read books and so forth. So a text structure dealing with sequencing, the minute that a student sees the word first, they already know they need to look for the word second, because a sequencing tells you that if the author is going to say first, make sure you pay attention to that, because the author is now going to say second and the author is going to say third. That's that knowledge that students have of text structures, and I call them their clues, that they're able to immediately look for as they're reading text. But a student not familiar with English and how text structures work in English text may overlook seeing first and not understand that they should look for the clue that the author is saying. That's really important because I'm going to tell you something else, but they don't know that and they're not aware of that. The other part is that text structures may work very, very differently in other language, and we still need to do research on that, especially with text structures in text written in Haitian Creole. How do they work? Do they work in the same way as they work in English? We need to do more research on that. That's an example of linguistic factors. The other is literacy factors. So literacy factors pertain to cognitive and metacognitive awareness of and use of reading strategies. So very quickly, those are the things that, what is the purpose for reading? To what extent in our classroom are we making it clear that there is a real purpose for reading, that you're trying to gain information, and the information hopefully that you'll be able to use? The other is to monitor your own understanding of the text, that through your interaction with the text, and this is something that I find that oftentimes some students are not aware of the fact that they should interact with the text. And this is a very interesting part, another area of research, which is when you analyze text in Haitian Creole, that is especially written in Haitian Creole, because of the rich oral tradition, I have often found that even though there's writing in Haitian Creole, there's a text in Haitian Creole, a lot of the oral tradition is often found in written text. And because of that, sometimes, and I'm still analyzing a lot of text written in Haitian Creole, and that some information may be left out of the text, and that is okay, because if it's embedded in an oral tradition, usually, and because it's spoken language, if somebody's speaking to you, you can ask and say, can you say that again? Or I missed this part, and so forth. But then when you bring that in text, in English text, the responsibility of everything being in the text is on the writer. Everything has to be written, spelled out for the writer. But in Haitian Creole, in Haitian text, not everything is in the text, because the belief is that the reader and the writer should be able to engage in some type of interaction where the writer can write things, but it's okay that the reader can insert different parts of it. So therefore, you have that interaction between the reader and the writer, which is, again, very interesting. But we do need more analysis of Haitian Creole text, text written in Haitian Creole, to determine these these understanding of the text and how it's organized. Right. Then another literacy factor is solving reading difficulties and monitoring comprehension. How do students, when in reading text in other languages, how do they solve reading difficulties? And how do they monitor their own comprehension? Do they go back and reread the text, reread the statement so that they make sure that they understand it? Or do they keep going, even when they don't understand it? All right, so those are some of the literacy factors. Another has to do with the knowledge factors. And this is where translanguaging comes in. So with background information needed to fill in gaps and understand text, to fill in gaps. And the way that gaps are filled is through having a print rich classroom where students engage in discussions, because it is through those discussions that they will fill in the gaps, gaps that are needed in order to understand text. What we mean by that is that it's through through experiences. That's how you gain additional knowledge. And through this knowledge, when you read text, then you're able to go back and understand text, because you have acquired enough background knowledge to bring into the text that you're reading. So when you have a rich language environment, your students learn so much more that they can actually bring into the text. All right, so along with the background knowledge, what we're talking about is strategic or metacognitive knowledge about reading. So we know what is involved in metacognitive knowledge about reading includes strategies for unlocking and meaning of unknown words. What are the strategies that your students use to unlock words? Using what they already know about a topic to make sense of what they read. So what is it that they use what they already know, and they bring that into the literacy process? Restating the meaning of text or passage using one's own words, again, giving them the opportunity to really manipulate and interact with the text, and evaluate what one has been read in a critical way. So we're evaluating, is that true? Just because it's written, does that automatically mean that it's absolutely true? So are they evaluating what they have read? So those are the strategies that are involved in the metacognitive knowledge about reading. One such strategy that I'm going to show you in terms of a Haitian classroom is using what they already know about a topic to make sense of what they read. Okay? So we will see that through that discussion of proverbs, right? And so these are the students right now engaged in discussions around proverbs. So let me share that with you, and for you to appreciate the excitement and the laughter and the sense of community just by discussing these the proverbs. And again, proverbs are used many times in Haitian communities and Haitian societies for different reasons. And here we have these students who, with limited resources, are in terms of financial and so forth, but are rich in the type of discussions that they have in their classrooms with their classmates. So we will I'm trying, let's see, 427. We're not going to watch the whole tape, but it's just interesting for the interaction that these students have. Okay, let's start right here, 427. All right, so you'll hear it in Haitian Creole, and then bear with me for non-Haitian Creole speakers. I will then translate once I stop it. So it'll just be just a very short, just a brief section of it. And but what I do want for you to do is to observe how the students are, how they're engaged and talking to one another. All right. Okay, I'll stop it here. I just wanted again for you to see the interaction with the students and enjoying their description of the Haitian proverbs. And they talked about two of them, and just and again, the proverbs are just sayings that bring it avoids confrontation, and it brings a certain level of knowledge of the culture in order for the listener to truly understand what is being expressed without it being clearly stated, but being knowing and being part of the culture, you understand that. Now, this was kind of like an impromptu session where this wasn't planned, that the students were supposed to discuss the proverbs. It's just that they were reading a textbook, and then one person mentioned a proverb, and then that brought about a whole discussion around the different proverbs, and then everyone started talking about the different proverbs that they know. So the first one that they talked about was that there are times that people sometimes may not want to hear, even though you want to tell them something. They're going to try to do whatever it is that they want to do anyway. So that was one translation of one. And the other, they talked about that when someone does something wrong, don't laugh at them, because your danger might not be too far behind. So you should know not to laugh. And everyone, as you can tell, they were contributing to it. And this goes on. And then they even said, and then the teacher, excuse me, the teacher even said, hey, how do you guys know these things? And then one said, oh, I have two old people, living in my house. So because of that, then I know these proverbs. And then the others, and you may not have heard them, they say, yeah, me too. So we find that family practice using language, it's clearly demonstrated here, because the first thing they said is that we have two old people living with us, and they use these proverbs, and it's obvious that that's being shared with this next generation because they know them so well, and they kept going and bringing up new ones because they're accustomed to them. So again, although this is very different from the types of discussions around proverbs, I don't think that I've never heard them being discussed here in the U.S. even in bilingual classrooms with Haitian students. But of course, that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And if you are doing that, definitely share that with me and let me know, because again, you're trying to create a language-rich classroom where students feel perfectly free to share how they are manipulating and processing language, how are they using language, and because they bring all of that into their literacy practices. All right. Okay. So in looking at these literacy practices, what are involved in all of them? So we call these the linguistic subsystems in the brain. So we're going to just briefly look at, discuss some of these subsystems. So we don't have an entire time for me to teach a whole linguistic course, but I'm going to definitely tie it in with of course, with literacy. So as all of you know, your teachers, we have the phonology and phonetics, which is the study of sound. So we're breaking up the subsystems. So we have morphology, the study of word formation, and then syntax, the study of the order of words in a sentence. Okay, then we also have semantics, as you know, which is the study of the nature of meaning of word phrases and sentences. And there's the relationship between language and the world view. How do we bring meaning into these words and phrases? And then we have pragmatics, which is how the context influences the interpretation of meaning. So a word, a sentence can be stated, but if the context is not present, sometimes you may misunderstand it unless you have the context. So pragmatics gives us its informative intent or sentence meaning, communicative intent or speaker meaning. Right, so those briefly are the linguistic subsystems in the brain and how they function and operate in the brain. So our role is to, as teachers, is to ensure that we are providing real authentic text in order for the students to be able to learn about these different linguistic subsystems. When the texts themselves that the students are engaged in are not authentic, it's difficult for them to grasp the sound system or word formation and so forth. It doesn't mean that you don't prepare lessons or mini lessons to help them along the way, but with authentic text, they want to read, they want to engage and find out more about language and so forth. So that makes it a lot easier to acquire. So we will take a look at what exactly we mean by that. So beginning with phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, which we are very familiar with, I'm sure, as educators. So we know that with phonemic awareness and phonological awareness, and phonics and fluency and vocabulary and text comprehension, they all benefit readers. But this is done through meaningful activities that values the home language. Meaningful activities because of the fact that if you are using the home language, the students can then make the connections with, when we're talking about the sounds, the phonemic awareness, the sound units, which are called phonemes, they're able to make that association simply because of the fact that this is the language that they know and they hear, and they're able to make those associations. This is followed by the phonological awareness. Now, with phonological awareness, that really includes syllables and parts of syllables when we begin to talk about onset and rhymes. And this I find to be very interesting, especially around syllables, where you have many cultures where students are not taught the isolated phonemes of the letters, but instead reading is taught through syllables as opposed to the particular sounds of the phonemes. And this is something that I have found to be definitely the case, especially as it relates to Haitian Creole. Even the Haitian alphabet, it's oftentimes you have, for example, like ma and so forth for the letter M. That I strongly recommend for you to look at the Graph's alphabet of Haitian Creole. But we find that, again, the sound units that include in syllables. So the focus is really more on syllables. And as most, I'm sure you know, that syllables are composed of onsets and rhymes. And within the rhyme, you have what is known as the nucleus and the coda. So when we ask students to give you a word that rhymes, this is where it comes from. So for example, you have a word like cat, and you ask a student to give you a word that rhymes with cat, and they'll say pat, and you'll say good, that is correct. So a couple of things here is basically what you're asking the students to do is keep the rhyme and change the onset. But so you're asking to keep the rhyme, and that's why they'll say pat. Something that rhymes with cat is pat, because they changed the onset from a C to a P, but they kept the rhyme. And so this is for teachers to be really conscious when we ask students to rhyme words, this is what they're doing, because you're focusing on the phonological awareness, which focuses on the syllable itself. Now, I bring this up also because in Haitian Creole, I have not come across, and again, for those of you who have, let me know, but I have not come across a lot of instruction around asking Haitian students to rhyme. Give me a word that rhymes. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't rhyme, especially in songs, but in terms of it being a deliberate area of instruction, especially in Haiti, I have not found that to be the case. And I'm still looking at that, but so far I have not. And in students from other countries as well, and if that is done in other countries, definitely share with us. But oftentimes I have asked students, give me a word from another country, speaking another language that rhymes with something. Oftentimes they don't understand, and they're not able because it's not done in classrooms at an instructional level. And so they don't know how to rhyme. They don't know what to do. And as a result, sometimes teachers would say, this child can't even rhyme, doesn't even know how to rhyme. Oh, this student is really not ready to be here. But that is absolutely not correct, simply because of the fact that the student, it's not that the student can't do it, it's just that the student has never learned how to rhyme, do you see? And which is incredibly important. And if we know how we use syllables and rhyme, then we can still assist teach our students, especially in the primary grades, but it should not be an expectation that they actually know how to do it, because again, this is not something that's done on a regular basis in other, as what I have seen thus far. And if that has changed, I would be more than happy for someone to say, oh no, it's being done quite a bit in these other schools, but I have not seen it in some of the schools in Haiti. But it doesn't mean that the students are not able to engage in what I call syllabic ways of attaching what they hear to reading, because it's done quite a bit in Haiti. And I will show you now an example of that. And very young children, they're actually clapping the different syllables, not being aware of it. They're just having fun. And so I'm going to show you an example of that. Okay, oops, right here. So, okay, one moment. Let me pause. Okay, and so here, before I share with you how these students are engaging in this language related activity, these very young children, they're being, not only is it that they're listening to the sounds and they're singing along, and they're not, and they're also, there's movement associated, but all of this is what they're bringing into their literacy practices. But before I play this for you, it's a short clip. Please notice back here, the cow, and further up on the hill, there's another cow, and the cows are there, the animals are there, they're outside, they're in nature, and for them, it's also this rich interaction with nature. They're not afraid of the cow. The cow is there. The cow is just part of their lives, and it's absolutely okay. This is part of their environment. This is part of some children, and this is why I say there's a huge difference between children in rural areas in the sense of their language environment and children in the city. Here, the student, a child coming from a rural part of Haiti will absolutely, or the countryside, or the mountains, as these children are, they will talk about, they will write about, yeah, on my way to school, the cow was right there eating, and or something to that effect. And you as a teacher may think, oh no, that doesn't happen, that doesn't exist. Well, yes, it does. In their environment, it really does. All right, so let's take a look at how they're using language, these young children, especially around phonemic awareness and phonological awareness. Okay, so basically, I just wanted for you to just listen to this video, and the fact that they're actually clapping, and how do you spell this word, and they're clapping how it's spelled, and then they're talking about, and the teacher said, does it have any bones? It says no, it doesn't, because they're talking about corn. No, there's no bones, and it's that you put it in the ground, and so forth. So just through this song, they're learning about it's incorporating spelling, and it's incorporating action, and it's incorporating their environment and corn, and how is it, what is it that you do with corn? All of this within the, so there's an element of reality to their use of language. All right, I will stop sharing for one moment. So I hope you were able to enjoy that interaction with the very young kids, and how they're being introduced to the sounds, and but all of it associated with a little dancing, and actions, and so forth. So that is one environment, as I mentioned to you. Now, that was phonetics and phonology and phonological awareness and so forth. Now with morphology and morphology of Haitian Creole. Just some very brief information on that. So in Haitian Creole, as you know, morphology is the study of how words are built in any language. And just briefly, through some of my research, I have found that many words in Haitian Creole are built based on onomatopoeia, which is really the sound that's associated with it. So because of the fact that we associate so much to the sounds of nature, we do have a lot of words that are made from the different sounds found in nature, which is, again, incredibly interesting and something to talk about. If you have books where words are clearly words that are created from sounds, that's a point that can be discussed in a language-rich classroom. And Haitian students would be more than happy to provide their input in terms of why that is so. But for morphology, going back to some of the words in terms of morphology, I have provided a few sentences just to show you the differences between how words are in Haitian Creole versus in English. So we have, and also morphology, because you're building words, it's also with prefixes and suffixes as well. So here I laughed a lot last night where the suffix is the ed, which is the inflectional affix in English that demonstrate past tense, and you see how it's added to the word. But in Haitian Creole, we do not have such suffixes that are added to the end of a word. Instead, we have what are known as pre-verbal markers, and they come actually before the verb as opposed to being attached to the verb. And I'm sharing this with you because as you see students writing, for example, if they came across ed, somehow they know that ed demonstrates past tense, but you see that they place the ed in front of the verb, you will understand why it is that the student is doing that. So one of the things that we have, and I have done that as well, I've talked about correcting certain errors that students are making. Yes, you still can help them, but it should come from a position that instead of saying that we're correcting their errors, if we can look at it in a positive sense and saying that they are accessing, for example, their linguistic repertoire, then that tells us that all they're doing is applying what they know from their native language to the second language. We used to call it, and we still do, the first language interference, but all of these terms give such negative connotations about what these children are doing with language. And it shouldn't be perceived in a negative way. In a way, it should be celebrated. Instead, we can say they are pulling, from their linguistic repertoire. And that's why they have the ed in front of the verb, simply because that's what's found in Haitian Creole. It's not that we're not going to help them to understand that in English that it goes after, it's attached to the word, but it is providing a more positive aspect to the discussion about these inflectional affixes. Do you see? So this is why it's a mind shift in terms of looking and bringing a more positive attitude in our classroom towards how English learners or emergent bilinguals, in this case our Haitian students, are actually doing with language without looking at it in such a negative way, which we often do. Oh my gosh, these students don't know this, they don't know this, they don't know this. Well, but they do know a lot. And what is it that they do know? And we capitalize on that. Here, l'ité manger, and this I will talk about in the next slide. She ate the food last night. Here we have here there are irregular forms of verbs in the English language when we do not have irregular form of verbs. Les points, and again, as I talked about before a few minutes ago, you have the S, which is another inflectional affix in the English language. We have 8 inflectional affixes, so this is another inflectional affix. And as you see here, although with the inflectional affix that demonstrates number or plural, it's not in Haitian Creole, it still follows the noun in this case, but however, it does not, it's still not attached to the noun. So another point of discussion, all right? And then ing, pretty much the same way you have that it is attached to this word, but here we have that it's attached, but not, it's not attached to the verb. In this case, it's attached to the noun. Okay. We also, for syntax, and this is one of my absolute favorite books, written by Baud Otelu from Educavision. I use it all the time in my class with teaching my pre-service teachers. And as we see here, this is Kabrit Maron, Kisa Oué, which is the same as brown bear, what do you see? But for us, because it's been creolized, if you will, or for our Haitian culture, that it's instead of a brown bear, we have brown goat. So brown goat, what do you see? But what I want to bring to your attention is the fact that here, Cabrit Marron, in this syntax, you have brown goat. So here, in English, the adjective comes before the noun. In this case, goat is the noun, the adjective precedes it. But in Haitian Creole, you see exactly the opposite, where the adjective follows the noun, right? So we don't have time for me to go through full syntax, but I just wanted to point out those differences to you. And if you have the opportunity to purchase this book from Educavision, please do so. It is absolutely wonderful. And then you can have the Haitian Creole book next to you, as well as just the Haitian Creole books. This is how I teach my pre-service teachers. And then they immediately begin, as I read the book, they make that association. Hey, that's brown bear. And then all of a sudden, then they understand the importance of background knowledge and what that does to help you to understand text. Do you see? So again, it's really quite good. And then I just wanted to share with you the differences between Haitian Creole and English, and you have some of which I've already talked about in terms of the pre-verbal marker. Here, we have no linking verbs such as am, are, or was. We do not use linking verbs, and we know that the purpose of linking verbs is actually to link it links subject to the predicate part of the sentence. But for us, again, we do not have linking verbs. Another that I would like to quickly bring to your attention is subject pronouns. Now, in English, we have subject pronouns and we have object pronouns. But in Haitian Creole, it's both. We can use the same subject pronoun and object pronouns. They are exactly the same. So again, if you find Haitian students using subject pronouns as object pronouns or object pronouns as subject pronouns, again, it's not something for us to look at in a negative way. You simply are referring to it that they're pulling from their linguistic repertoire of Haitian Creole to use the same pronouns in either as subjects or as objects. And then that way you'll create some type of mini lesson or have books available, again, a print rich classroom where they have books available, and they can then begin to see, oh, there's a difference in English in terms of the pronouns. Okay, so what I say is that first language influences on English language literacy, and this is what I was just talking about, the first language, and in this case, this is Haitian Creole. It does influence English language literacy simply because we have such different structures and so forth. So teachers should consider integrating their teaching explicit instruction in how languages are different and similar in terms of sound structure. What a wonderful activity to have in your classroom, not only for, or a wonderful exchange between Haitian students and talking about Haitian Creole and some of your non-Haitian students and talking about English and having them talk about the different sounds. What are we don't have that sound. We say it this way, we say it that way. Again, having them talking about language. So word and sentence formation, vocabulary and text. So engage Haitian students in reading sample texts that address simple topics in Creole and English. So you have a set of 2 books in your classrooms where the topics are more or less similar, but the one they're written in Haitian Creole and the other, they could be written in English, and then they could also be written in French. So you have all these similar topics, but written in different languages. And there you can have students discuss them because they will choose whichever language that they would like to read the text in, but then they can still talk about it because the topics are similar. Okay. And so I just would like to leave you with two very quick videotapes. And this is, as you see, the Friends of Matanoa with Christine Lowe, and she will explain her mother tongue books. And then we'll end with one of our wonderful Haitian students. This is a YouTube video of her actually reading. We won't watch the entire video, but it's so interesting how she's reading her textbook that she actually wrote. All right.
My name is Chris Lowe, and the innovation is the Mother Tongue Book Project in Haiti. What's innovative about it is that there's not a lot of books in Creole for children to read and enjoy, and so we're creating books, but the way we're doing it is having children themselves write books and read books that other kids have made. And only a child can know what they are interested in. And so then the vocabulary becomes something that they're interested in, and obviously the illustrations. And when your peer has written the book, you really want to read it. And so that's what is the extra motivator, that it's really in context from their community. What's essential about it is that it's also being done in their mother tongue, because most education is done in French in Haiti, but only 5% of the population speak French, and 100% speak Creole. So you would think that education would be done in the language that they understood. So the next step for this specific project is that we're going to be going into other schools and having them do this in their classrooms and making multiple copies so that they can start to build Creole libraries in their school with their own work. So they're exchanging and building the library out of children's work.
Okay. And this is something that I strongly recommend, that we begin to create the books that we want for our Haitian students to use. Okay. And so I leave you with a reading of it's called Ticochon Cap Chanté. All right, I'll start sharing my screen for 1 minute, and so that. All right, and this is an example, as I said, of a young child reading her mother tongue book, and I hope. And this project, as you can see, started some time ago, and I hope that those of you listening perhaps can contribute to this project, pick up on this project, or in a dual language program here in Palm Beach County in Haitian Creole and English, that this is something that we undertake as well, of having children create their own books and then sharing them. Okay, and as I said, we won't watch the entire tape. Okay. All right. Was and she continues and she reads the rest of the book, which is interesting again because Haitian students, especially now, can definitely read in Haitian Creole, right? I just wanted to I wanted to end with for you to actually see also students reading in Haitian Creole. Okay. All right, everyone, and these are simply my references. Once again, I would like to thank you very much for attending my session. I hope you were able to um, learn, get new information about literacy and Haitian students and activities that you can actually do in your classroom. But the creativity as educators stems from your willingness to see the students in a very positive way and see all of their linguistic gifts that they bring to the classroom. And from that, as educators, you will be able to even be incredibly creative in the types of classroom activities that you will be able to create and to develop. But it has to start from that positive perception of our students. Thank you very much for your time and enjoy the rest of the Institute.